Hi everybody, my name is Eileen O'Connor. I'm one of the co-founders of NYCD16 Indivisible, and this is our second talk about single-payer healthcare in New York. We had our first talk in May with Gustavo Rivera and Oliver Fine. So today we have Peter Arno and Representative Richard Gottfried with us. Peter is a health economist who has helped develop the California single-payer plan, among other things. And Richard Gottfried is a senior member of the New York State Assembly. He's chair of the Health Committee there and has introduced the single-payer plan every year for the last 22 years?
25.
25 years. And he's a tireless advocate for accessible health care for all these years. So really pleased to have the both of you here. I just wanted to do a little bit of a summary of what we've talked about, what some of us know, and then do a quick run through some of the questions that people asked be answered for this talk. Our group endorsed the idea of New York single payer around March or April this year. Many of us are healthcare providers in one form or another, and until this election thought that any kind of I'm speaking for myself here, thought that a single-payer plan just wasn't feasible. It was a great idea, but it would be impossible to try to implement. But now, given what's happened in Washington, I think we all are feeling nervous about healthcare coverage for ourselves, our families, our patients, and our community. So we as a group decided to learn more about this. And as I said, we had Gustavo Rivera with us and Oliver Fine. And in that talk, we learned that, as many of us already know, many of us have inadequate or no health care coverage, despite the high cost of medical care in this country. And despite the high cost of health care, our rates of various health indicators like maternal death rates, infant mortality rates, death related to poor access to care are abysmal compared with other industrialized countries. We learned that the big expense in this country compared to other countries are the administrative costs related to the insurance industry. We learned that the ACA insures many more people now than in 2010, but so many people now still have really high out-of-pocket costs like high deductibles and co-pays, and that many, many people are still not covered. Healthcare costs are about 25% of a business's budget, and also 25% of municipalities, county, state budgets. So it's a huge expense, and the expense is going up. We learned that single payer could cut those costs by 9 to 20% depending on the models that you look at. If we were to implement single payer, it would cut business costs and it would reduce expenses of running our various governments. So the best thing is, before a single payer, everybody would be covered. Primary and preventive services are key. Specialists and tertiary providers would be okay, but we need to know more about that. We learned from Gustavo Rivera the role that the IDC is playing at the Senate level in terms of blocking many progressive bills, including, although they were on paper signed on in support of this, because of the IDC, the chair of the Health Committee is a Republican, and the bill never saw the light of day. It never got out of the Health Care Committee. So that was disappointing for many of us, because I know that we have all awakened and want instant results. But our role model here waiting 25 years for it's really inspiring. Okay, so the IDC, the Republican-led Healthcare Committee, and you can kind of tell that it hasn't really gotten traction in many spheres yet, because there's not outrage by the insurance companies, and there's not a whole lot of resistance to it yet. I think the lobby interests are waiting to see what happens with all this. And then we weren't sure where the governor stood on this bill. So we got a tutorial about the basics of this plan, but wanted to get more in depth about sort of the economic underpinnings of this and how it works. So I'm a family nurse practitioner and have been for many years. I work in the community, so primary care is my shtick, but I'm also connected to a hospital, and I don't know how hospitals feel about this, how it would look for them, how it would look for specialists, how can we argue to bring this on, people on board and get excited about this so that we can kind of move forward together. So that's why we're here. I called Peter Arno, and he was very kind in saying that he would help us do this because he's helped to write the California single payer bill, so he's really well versed about kind of the ins and outs of this, and is also helping to write the national single payer, a lot of the legislation there. So, we can get a lot of good information from him about that. And with Assemblyman Gottfried, you've been in this game a long time. Our Indivisible group wants your help in telling us, how we can help you and what we can do between now and January, the next session, so that we can make more progress next time around. Questions from the group that we put out. How would you argue for single payer to a conservative or somebody who thinks that government's too big a part of our lives or too much a part of our lives? That's one sort of question that if you can shape your comments to. And how do we, if we pass this bill, how do we get, given the climate in Washington, how do we get the waivers that would be needed for Medicare, Medicaid, and all of the restrictions around employee-based insurance, the specifics of that, I'm very interested in that. How would it look to hospitals and other healthcare institutions? How would we convince a cardiologist that this is a good thing to do? And under a single-payer system, it's not possible for everything to be covered, so how would decisions be made? People worry about rationed care. How would that look? And one big question is, the health insurance industry is huge, and what would happen to all those workers? How would they have gainful employment if this were to be implemented? And then, if it does get passed, how do we get it passed? How do we organize to get it past the insurance lobby and that sort of all those interests? 5 minutes each? Okay, so, yes. I think if you want this on, we have to hold it.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good evening. For a lot of you, this will be a refresher course in single payer. If you were here when Gustavo Rivera was here. So I think for me, certainly this all starts with the proposition that healthcare is a basic human right. Now, in 1789, when James Madison was putting together a list of our rights, neither he nor anybody else thought to add health care. Why? Because in the 1700s, what was health care? It was bloody hacksaws and leeches and a nurse who kept you comfortable while you died. Not very expensive, not very effective, and so it never occurred to anyone that should be a human right or that it needed to be part of what you would look to government to deliver. We were looking to government for public schools, at least in New York we were at that point. A lot of the rest of the country took a while to catch up. Roads and canals and the postal service, thanks to Ben Franklin. But healthcare, no, nobody thought to add that to the list. Today, things are very different and have been for many decades. I firmly believe that almost every problem we face in health and healthcare, as patients, as healthcare providers, as workers, as employers, as taxpayers, is made worse and harder to solve because of the fact that our system is totally rooted in insurance companies. And it is a system that keeps us from taking control of our health care, from taking responsibility for our health care. It undermines family financial stability, and it is a system that is truly rigged against working people, because insurance companies expect you to pay the same premium and be up against the same deductibles and copays, whether you are a multi-million-dollar CEO or the receptionist or the janitor in the CEO's office. No relationship to ability to pay. Now, the Affordable Care Act has made a lot of improvements in the system, and nobody, to me, in their right mind should want to go back to what we had before then. The basic flaw in the ACA, though, is that it leaves us in the hands of insurance companies. And, you know, that means ever rising premiums, which were rising before the ACA, by the way, in case anyone thinks that the ACA caused rising premiums. It means more and more health plans with larger and larger deductibles and copays, which for people who are not among the very wealthy can be a real obstacle to getting health care or to having stable family finances. It means narrower and narrower restricted provider networks. So an insurance company is telling you what doctor and what hospital to go to, and if you think they're doing it because they're looking out for your best interests and want to make sure you only go to the best doctors in town, if you think that, I have a bridge to sell you by whatever name. And if you dare to go out of network, they will pay either a small fraction of the bill or none of it at all. As I said, the costs all are not based at all on ability to pay and are real obstacles to people getting health care or being able to afford that health care. A third of families in this country with insurance in a given year have a family member who goes without health care, usually for a serious condition. A third of working age adults report that they went without health care in a given year for financial reasons, and another third reported that they had financial difficulty paying their health care bills. We see employers increasingly shifting more and more of the cost of health coverage to their workers. And before the employer mandate under the ACA, more and more employers were dropping coverage. And if that mandate is repealed by the Republicans, we will be back to seeing more and more employers dropping coverage. New York State can do better than that. And that's what the New York Health Act is all about. The New York Health Act would provide universal, complete health coverage to every New Yorker. And I mean every New Yorker. However they got here, whenever they got here, whether they're rich or poor, whatever, all 20 million people here would be covered. And they would have complete choice of doctor and nurse practitioner and hospital and other providers. Taking insurance companies out of the picture, we estimate would put a net of $45 billion back in the hospital, in the pockets rather, of New Yorkers. It would end the regressive tax, really, that we now pay to insurance companies for premiums and deductibles and the like, which bear no relation to ability to pay. Instead, it would be funded fairly through broad-based, and in New York, we are proposing that it be funded through broad-based taxes based on ability to pay, a progressively graduated income tax that would be levied against payroll income that is subject to the Medicare Part A tax, which is how we define it, as well as being applied against taxable non-payroll income, like taxable dividends, capital gains, and the like. Our calculation is that 98% of New York households would be spending less in the New York Health Act taxes than they are now spending on premiums and out-of-pocket costs. The New York Health Act will dramatically simplify the process for patients who would no longer have to be fighting with their insurance companies, no longer have to be looking up in a database whether the lab you want to go to is in or out of network, something I spend seems like a fair amount of my time doing. And usually it turns out the database is from 6 months ago and is wrong. For doctors and hospitals, it would mean that they are no longer having to spend 5 times the administrative costs that doctors and hospitals in Canada have to spend. In Canada, they have a single-payer system. They spend 1/5 what our doctors and hospitals spend on administrative costs and dealing with dozens and dozens of different systems, each with different forms and different requirements, et cetera. And they would be able to therefore spend more time treating patients and helping to coordinate care. For employers, it would, among other things, mean eliminating the administrative headaches of picking a health plan and negotiating with a health plan and listening to workers' complaints about the health plan, which ends up costing employers in this state about $2 billion a year. And on top of that, it would dramatically save the cost that employers now spend for health coverage if they are providing coverage, because the New York Health Act bill will be dramatically lower. A portion of it will derive from taxes on capital gains and the like. And unless you're an employer with very high income employees, the progressive graduation based on ability to pay would help bring down cost. Now, as was said earlier, lots of people, when they hear about single payer, they say, oh, great idea, everybody knows it's the only thing that makes sense, but it can't happen. We are changing that, at least in New York. I don't expect single payer to happen anytime soon in Washington. Maybe when pigs have wings and can fly. In fact, I think everything that is likely to happen from Washington is going to make our problems, bad as they are, dramatically worse. And in fact, I believe that the New York Health Act is the only thing that a progressive state can do to protect its people and to produce enough savings to be able to fill the huge holes that the Republicans in Washington are undoubtedly going to blast in our system. The Affordable Care Act has, by highlighting the problems that remain in our system, has brought enormous new support for single payer from the labor movement, and most of the large politically active unions in New York are supporting the single payer bill. And that, plus what has been going on in Washington, as people realize that our problems are not going to be solved in Washington, are bringing more and more public support. The Assembly passed the bill in 2015, 2016, again this year, by roughly 2-to-1 margins. And I think all of that is helping to convince more and more people that this is not something that could never happen, but this is something that is really achievable. And I believe that as people come to think of it as something that is achievable, I think that helps make it something that is virtually inevitable. New York has led the country since the 1780s in making change happen that many people thought could never happen. We practically invented the idea of free universal elementary and secondary education in the 1780s. In 1799, we were the first state in the Union to pass a law abolishing slavery. We led the country in child labor laws and minimum wage and the like, enacting gay rights legislation. We were not the first state to enact same-sex marriage, but we were by far the biggest to enact it and really helped turn the country around. some of these changes have taken decades to enact. Some have happened a lot more quickly than many people thought was possible. A group like Indivisible can really help make a difference. You're all involved in a variety of organizations, I would bet. A lot of those are organizations that ought to learn about this issue and support this issue, and you can help make that happen. Your state senators here in Westchester, I think, are all people supporting the bill, unless I'm missing one or two, but you live near to districts with Republican state senators who could use some persuading. And if that doesn't work, who could use some ringing of doorbells in the 2018 election. And you can all help in making that happen. So this is an issue that I really believe we can turn around. We can talk about some of the particular questions in Q&A. I think the bottom line is that people have some very simple expectations from government. They want to be able to make a living and get to keep some of it and be treated with respect and fairness. And whether you're talking about patients or doctors, I think that means a single-payer system. Thank you.
So if it's okay, we'll just go to have Peter talk, and then we'll do a Q&A after that.
Okay, so as has been mentioned, I didn't work on the bill per se in California. What we did was the economic and financing plan for the bill.
Can you put your microphone on? Oh,
I can talk loud. All righty.
is that better?
So I don't have too many disagreements with what Dick Godfrey just said. Almost none. But I will focus on one. But first I thought I'm going to tell you, I'm going to try to touch about 3 or 4 different topics. I'm going to start from zero and say, what is single-payer health care, for starters? I want to talk about the differences between the approach we took in California and the approach that we're taking in New York. And then I want to really focus on what are the common mischaracterizations of single-payer or universal health care, and why we need to change that and change our messaging about this issue. And if there's time, we could even touch on the issue of having a state single-payer approach versus a national approach. So, number one, what is single-payer? In very, very simple terms, and it's the same terms that apply both in New York and California, it merely just means that the funds, wherever they come from, are funneled into one place, and that one place is the government in each New York and California, or if it was done nationally at the national level. So when we're talking about using the funds of Medicaid or Medicare, it would all get funneled into one place. That's it. That's what a single-payer approach means, but it's important to understand that because that leads to many other misunderstandings. Okay, so let me just highlight what I think is the major difference between the two approaches in New York and California, and it has to do with the financing of the bill. As Dick laid out, in New York, it's based on payroll assessments using marginal tax increases, starting at 9% if your income's over $25,000, going up to 16%. At least this is the plan that Jerry Friedman had written 2 years ago. In addition to which, as it was just mentioned, there's the similar marginal tax increases on non-earned income, capital gains, dividends, and so on. This is the classic progressive and time-worn approach to funding single-payer healthcare. It's been around for at least 25 years, if not longer. In California, and by the way, this was also the same approach that Vermont used when they passed their single-payer bill. What the folks in California decided to do instead was to enact two simple taxes. One is called the gross receipts tax on business revenue, and the other is the sales tax. And let me just explain very briefly. So we had a 2.3% gross receipts tax and a 2.3% sales tax. And so the first question is, well, how is that progressive? Sales tax, it's regressive tax, and so on and so forth. Let me just say this. The business tax, we exempted the first $2 million in gross receipts to all businesses. That, in and of itself, eliminates all taxes from 80% of every business in the state of California. The next 10% of businesses would pay an effective tax rate of less than 1% because their average gross receipts were around $3 million. You exempt the $2 million, you're left with 2.3% of $1 million, and so it's an effective rate of 1%. And only the largest businesses, the top 10%, would pay the full 2.3%. So it was a way of, and by the way, the gross receipts tax generates about 2/3 of the money needed for a single payer in California. The sales tax, again at 2.3%, was made more progressive and equitable by two things. One, we exempt costs related to housing, utilities, and food. In addition to which, the lowest income residents, those that are currently eligible for Medicaid or Medi-Cal in California, would get a 2% tax credit on their income tax, which would effectively wipe out any increase that they would pay towards sales tax. Those two taxes alone funded the whole thing. Now, in Vermont, I don't know how many of you have followed this historical odyssey of single payer in this country, but in Vermont, it passed the legislature, and the governor, in the end, pulled the bill. And the reason, my take on why they pulled the bill, was essentially because they were proposing I think it was 11% assessment on payroll income, which was a huge amount, and politically, it was killed for political reasons. It was not because single payer would cost them too much money. In New York, in California, in Vermont, every study that's ever been done shows that single payer is always going to be less expensive than the current system. And in part, a good part of it is the insurance. But the insurance part of it, and the insurance is a critical piece. Both in New York and California, the insurers are not 100%, but largely out of the picture. The only room left, and I believe this is true in New York as well, is if there were some services that were not covered by the essential benefit program, insurers could have some role in providing some extra coverage. By the way, the other advantage of this tax approach that we took in California is that, I should say one thing. Every business in the state of California, and if anyone's interested in the details on this stuff, I can direct you to our report, it's publicly available. Every business, regardless of size, would have a lower payment in their taxes than they are currently paying towards providing health care for their employees. Every business, even the largest ones. The savings is bigger for smaller businesses, but even for the biggest ones, the ones paying the full 2.3%, even for them, it would be a lower amount of money than they're currently paying. And as far as the sales tax and what consumers would pay, again, it's very similar to New York. Only the top income earners would pay a slight amount more than they're currently paying for health care, and it's something in the order of 1 to 2%. But for the vast majority of residents, it would be considerably less. And we have the exact details broken down by low income, middle income, high income, whether you have insurance, whether you don't have insurance, and so on. All right, so that, and there's one other piece of this in New York, and again, I'm a little hazy when I read the bill and I read Jerry's analysis on the, even on these high marginal tax rates, the employers are expected to contribute 80%. Now, I don't know if that 80% is locked in the law, or that's just what they're hoping, that the employers would pay 80% on the payroll side of that tax. But there was certainly, in the bill, as I understand it, room for collective bargaining between employers and labor. And to me, that adds a whole other level of time and resources that we wouldn't have in the tax approach I laid out for California. All right. Lies, lies, and more lies. The reason I think that talking about the mischaracterizations and the lies spouted about single payer is important is that we have to be prepared not only with the truths and the facts, sometimes facts don't mean so much anymore, but we need to learn more effective ways to project and message the truths in ways that resonate with the American public. Let's not forget that 1 out of 3 Americans didn't know that Obamacare and the ACA were the same thing. And if you go back to 2009, things have progressed, but back in 2009, the whole cadre from the Tea Party crowd had signs saying, government, hands off my Medicare. Strictly a Medicare program. So I would say the single most ridiculous lie is that single payer or universal coverage is just too expensive. This is nonsense. Virtually every study that's ever been done has demonstrated the waste that's intrinsic to our current healthcare system and why the U.S. has the most expensive healthcare in the world. But this truth is very easily twisted around by a lack of understanding of what's involved in moving to a universal system. So I'm going to try something that I probably shouldn't do, but just bear with me, and I'm going to run through a few numbers that will explain why this is kind of easily twisted and mischaracterized in the media and in the public. So in California, currently spends about $370 billion a year, total. Keeping that system intact, that's today, keeping that system intact and covering everybody, totally, with the current system would cost about $400 billion. But what we did was we used very conservative estimates, just like in the New York plan. The numbers are not that different. What would be the savings by transitioning to a single payer plan? In our estimation, it would cost about $330 billion. So we're going from 370 to 330, but with the 330, we're covering everybody. And let me point out, and I think Dick mentioned this, it's not only, and this is an important political point, it's because what we ran up against is California, the California Health Exchange is probably, the best health exchange in the United States, I think. It's certainly in the top 2 or 3. And they've done a heck of a good job at getting people covered under Covered California. The problem is, and so they have but the uninsured rates in California today are roughly the same, between 7 and 8% approximately. But that's not the full story, because at least between 20 and 25% of people with full coverage are what's called underinsured, which means that they have co-pays and deductibles high enough that they have access to care problems. They can't and won't get the care they need because of that. So it's not just eliminating the 7 or 8% uninsured, it's there's another 20% of the insured that are underinsured. And so we calculated, of course, not only what would it cost to cover the uninsured, but what would it cost to fully make the difference up for the underinsured. Now, as I said, to get to full single payer universal coverage in California would cost about $330. Now, here's something that I didn't know when I got into this. 70% of what is currently being paid for in healthcare is already coming from public funds. 70%. So 70% of the 330 that I'm talking about to reach universal coverage in California is about $225 billion. That's Medicare, Medicaid, and some other public funds. So now we got to go from 225, which is the current funding from public sources, to 330. So it's a little over $100 billion. Where do we get the $100 billion? That's where the 2 taxes come in. And it's the same in New York. They have the savings. Our estimates are a little different, but not that much, not that different on the savings side. It's just how do you get that bump that you need to reach full coverage. So the law, and so I've been following the California. I don't know how many of you know that it passed the Senate in California. It's the reverse in California as New York. The bill passed the Senate May 31st or June 1st, and the next stop was the Assembly. And I think it was about a week ago Friday that the Assembly killed the bill in California. The Assembly Speaker said, no, it's not ready. We're not doing it. Now, it's still not quite over yet. There's still a chance. They have some very fierce advocates in California, and it's mainly labor. It's mainly groups like the National Nurses Union, California Nurses Association that are pushing this, having demonstrations all over the state, and they're continuing. And they have another week or so to possibly turn it around, and I could get into why I think the bill was killed in some Q&A if people are interested. But I want to get back to the miscalculation of the cost. When in a recent LA Times article, a Republican state senator said the plan is reckless and said taxes would hurt business and families while financially crippling state government. It's offensive to the people who have to pay for it. That's a state senator from California. Now, so it's just nonsense. And we, in the struggle for universal coverage, have to be able to deal with this kind of response because it's every news article in California, and there have been dozens over the last month, have mentioned it costs too much money, how are we going to pay for it? We laid out exactly how we pay for it. Last month, another example, do you remember Dick Gephardt? He was somewhat of a moderate back in the day. Things have changed. Gephardt's now a corporate lobbyist and on the board of Centene, an insurer that sells insurance in 28 states. And last month he was at a Centene board big meeting here in New York, and he's quoted as saying, There is no way you could pass single payer in any intermediate future, Gephardt declared. America, he added, has, quote, the greatest healthcare system in the world, bar none. And while single payer would provide universal coverage, there would be less quality and innovation without the involvement of the private sector. Now, this doesn't hold up either. It's another bunch of nonsense. Most medical innovation, if you want to talk about the innovation side, on the health side, comes from public funding, government funding, for the NIH, to the universities. That's where most of the innovation comes from. And if you want to talk about innovation on the private insurance industry side, we get the things that Dick was talking about, narrowing networks, multi-tiered coverage rates, etc. And if all those fail, they always have the 3 Ds to rely on, which is deny, delay, and defend. That's the insurance industry's innovative contribution. So getting back to the messaging, we need to keep it simple. It isn't really that, oddly enough, in some ways, conceptually, it is not that complicated. Most folks don't know, though, the terms that are bandied about all the time: individual mandate, public option, health exchange, or even, as I started with, what does single payer mean? I used to think that Medicare for all was the way to go in terms of encapsulating this, but as I said, back in 2009, that wasn't that effective either. And so I think we need to think carefully about how we talk about this, and why not just call it universal health care or health care for all, as opposed to putting labels on it that people will not understand. And I think we could take a lesson from the British healthcare system. They had 3 core principles when the National Health Service in Britain was established in 1948, that was as true then as true now. 1, meet the needs of everyone. 2, be free at the point of delivery. And 3, it's based on need, not ability to pay. 3 simple core principles that everyone can understand, and certainly in England, the people believe this wholeheartedly, even despite whatever problems you might hear about the British system. Is more popular than any other program in the country. It's more popular than the royal family, according to opinion polls. So again, I'd like to stop there because I know there are many, many questions people have raised, and we can get into the weeds if people like on more of the details. Maury.
So I like either approach, and I think the thing we're going to have to change is an affordable universal health care. We need a model that contradicts the...
Can I just, if we can, you can share a mic here,
Sure.
then we'll just carry this around so we can get it all.
Affordable, that's your bad.
Sorry. So I just wanted to add to the model that it's not just universal health care.
If I could interrupt, those of you who are constituents of Shelley Mayer, your assembly member is here.
And a co-sponsor of the bill.
Yes, indeed.
Because I think you're right about messaging, but we're going to have to have a message that resonates with people so that they're not frightened that they're going to go broke paying new taxes, because that's the way it's going to appear. That's just a statement. I have a lot of questions, but I'm only going to take one, so other people can ask too. Both approaches rely on a stream of dollars that are not steady from year to year, because the economy changes from year to year. How do you compensate for the fluctuations in sales, as an example, or in individual incomes from year to year?
Let me just, a quick response to that. The gross receipts tax, this is something that the colleagues I work with, these macroeconomists up at UMass, the gross receipts tax, the gross receipts tax is far more stable than income tax. It is one of the most stable sources of economic activity there is. So it's better in that regard. And it's huge. Gross receipts are enormous. Like I said, in California, over 2/3 of the money was from the gross receipts tax, as opposed to the sales tax.
Yeah, but whatever revenue stream we look at, people ask, what happens in a recession? Revenue goes down. And part of the answer is, as Peter was saying, with an awful lot of economic indicators and revenue sources, on the margins, the up and down may look significant. I mean, if unemployment goes from 4.5% to 6.5%, that's front page news, but bottom line is that's 2%. But the current system is the one that is most subject of all to the instability of economic fluctuation. In the last big recession we had, an awful lot of people lost their health coverage entirely because they lost their job. An awful lot of employers dropped health coverage or shifted the cost to the workers, or chose to buy plans that may have had a lower premium, but only because they had skyrocketing deductibles pushing the cost onto workers who couldn't afford it. So it's actually the current system that is the most subject to wreckage in economic bad times, and that wreckage is overwhelmingly focused on those folks who are least able to sustain it for the very reason that they've lost their job or their wages have gone down.
In practical terms, if there was a severe recession, would you cut back on the amount that you pay for the services?
No, just like, in the last recession, we didn't say no more algebra. Or we're only going to pave the uptown side of the streets. We try to economize, and where necessary, we raise taxes. Just like if there's, if healthcare costs go up, insurance companies raise their premiums. Actually, they raise their premiums even if healthcare costs don't go up. And you wouldn't want a system in which whether you could get life-saving healthcare depended on whether you lost your job or whether your employer thought they couldn't afford the healthcare to keep you alive. That's the world we now live in.
What happens if Medicare and Medicaid are stripped and those funds aren't available anymore?
Well, today, if tomorrow the Republicans do their darndest, we will lose an enormous amount of money for health care in New York, and there will be no way we can fill those gaps. I mean, if we lose billions of dollars in Medicaid, as we will if the Republicans do any of what they're talking about, we would have no choice in this state but to what? Try to raise the state income tax by several billions of dollars. And if they privatize Medicare, there's nothing New York is going to be able to do about it. A single payer system is the only system that produces enormous savings that can be used, if worse comes to worse, to fill those gaps.
Oh, okay. So you think it's possible?
Oh, it's not only impossible, it's not only possible, it is the only thing that's possible.
I love the idea of getting rid of the insurance companies and their expense. What about the pharmaceutical companies? Do these single-payer plans have any plan for that?
Oh, yeah.
What is it?
I got to admit that in both New York and California plans, there's essentially a call for negotiating prices with the drug companies. And the way we did our estimate, and this is pretty similar to what New York has suggested as well. The way we came up with our actual estimates in California on the drug side was we said basically that with a single payer negotiating drug prices, we would get 30% lower prices. And that 30% wasn't picked out of the air. It was basically based on the lowest prices that the federal government currently pays through the VA system. We compared it to Canada, which is also 30% lower than the United States. And that was the ballpark. And let me just add one point to it. The insurance companies are a big problem. There's no question about it. But I got to tell you, if we eliminated the insurance companies tomorrow, that would not necessarily do anything to, or would not do enough to what they call bend the cost curve in healthcare. Because the cost, and this is something also that is often missed in a lot of these plans, or a lot of discussions about this.
By the way, that's not rain, that's wild applause from the streets.
We're making rain here. The drivers in healthcare costs has to do with what's driving those costs. It's not the insurance companies per se. It is to an extent, but it's also got to look at where is the money going in healthcare. It's going to drugs, it's going to physician fees, and it's going to hospitals and medical device manufacturers. Those are the big sources, and those sources have to be regulated in order to reduce and bend the cost curve in healthcare.
Hi. I'm a lobbyist, and I represent financially distressed hospitals. And thank you, Senator Godfrey, for voting in favor of all my bills this past session, which died in the Senate thanks to the Senator Independent Democrats. But my point is that we spent some time in the United Kingdom, and we're actually spending more for healthcare in this country now than the Europeans spend. The value-added tax and the corporate income tax alone, when you compare that with what America's spending in terms of the VA and administrative costs to administer medicine, including the insurance companies, we're spending much more now than they're spending, and we're getting almost nothing for it in terms of universal coverage. Is it the message, or is it the rainmakers in Washington and Albany and Sacramento and Annapolis that are just killing this effort? Thank you.
Yeah. It's, and I don't know how to turn this on. It's a variety of things. Yeah, there's a button, but it's not, doesn't seem to be doing anything. Okay, you know, in first grade we had a wooden microphone for show and tell. And the teacher explained that it actually works, but only if you speak in a loud and clear voice.
Do you want to use this one or?
Okay, so some of the opposition is the insurance industry, and you can talk till you're blue in the face. You're never going to convince them. The only way to overcome their opposition is by having massive support in the general public, the same way we've overcome the tobacco industry and various other forces from time to time. Similarly with the drug companies. There are a lot of people, though, who are opposed to this because they grew up believing, and a lot of this is the business community, who, despite the fact that it's crystal clear that they would save money, many of them have grown up with a, fundamental belief that if anything is a government program, it's got to be bad for them at the end of the day. That's what they've grown up believing. We are gradually convincing many of them that the current system is so bad for their wallet and their bank accounts that they have to turn to something else. And that's what we've got to do with a lot of people. There are an awful lot of people who, when they hear government, they think, oh my God, this is terrible. One thing to do is explain to them, we all love the Social Security system, we all love the Medicare system, try going to a meeting of senior citizens and telling them you're going to go back to what the world was before Medicare and see if you get out alive. You know, traditional Medicare is a single-payer system. And it is about the most beloved thing that government does in this country. So we've got to, you know, that's the message we need to get out to people.
Thanks, and thanks to you both for leading this fight. It's pretty exciting that we're at this moment. In terms of staying on messaging and how we message, I think one of the concerns and the tropes these days is that people are losing their jobs, the forgotten people, and has been, you know, talk that the number of people who could lose jobs would be in the tens of thousands, if not more. And so just in terms of messaging and meeting that argument, what are the thoughts that, you know, folks who are writing policy have about what will happen to, you know, 20, 30, 40,000 people who are going to lose jobs with universal health?
Well, there are 23,000 people in New York State employed in the health insurance industry. The rate of turnover in that industry is, we're told, about 50% a year. So, partly because most of those jobs are not all that much fun. And people find other opportunities. But the bottom line is, first of all, those 23,000 people will find employment in a couple of 100,000 jobs that we estimate will be created by pumping those tens of billions of dollars back into the New York economy. You pump money back into people's pockets, they buy more, they spend more, jobs are created. The other thing that we always have to remember, while it is not the fault of the people who go to work every day at insurance companies, that the company they work for, its main economic function is to stand in the way of people's health care and family financial stability. That's not the fault of the people who work in those companies, but it is what those companies do. And we should not keep depriving people of health care and family financial stability because it's a jobs program. We shouldn't do that. And under the New York Health Act, we authorize spending a slice of the tens of billions of dollars of revenue that would come in for retraining and relocation. But ultimately, those jobs, A, will be replaced by a lot more jobs, and B, it would be immoral to defend a system like we have now as a jobs program.
Couple of questions. Logistics. How does a state system intersect with the federal system? A state single payer versus a national single payer? And also in terms of that, what would happen to New York State Medicaid? Would that be incorporated in, or would it be a separate thing? And one other question. It would seem that, at least for a federal system, that the big corporations should love to get the expenses of healthcare, even though they're asking people to pay more and more off their backs. Is there a way of getting these people who have the money behind this, or why aren't they behind this? I understand the insurance companies is a different thing.
Okay, the Medicaid program technically would continue to exist, as would the Medicare program, but both of them would be wrapped into the system. We would all carry the same plastic card. Buried in the magnetic strip on the back might be the fact that we are Medicaid eligible or Medicare eligible, but we and our doctors and hospitals would not be able to tell the difference. Federal Medicaid money would continue to flow to New York. The New York Medicaid program has always covered people who the federal government does not consider Medicaid eligible from day one of our Medicaid program. And the way we work that is we keep careful documentation of which people are federally eligible and which are not, and we give that to the federal government, and they send us the money that they think we're entitled to. It's easy to add folks to the Medicaid program because we run the program. Medicare, there are a variety of ways it could be merged into the New York Health Act. The best would be for the federal government to say, we'll get you out of our hair, we'll figure out every month roughly how many dollars Medicare would send to New York, we'll write you a check, you put it in the trust fund. Medicare recipients in New York will get better health coverage than they are today. Another alternative would be we could form a state-sponsored Medicare Advantage plan, which, unlike every other Medicare Advantage plan, which is Medicare Managed Care. Unlike other Medicare Advantage plans, it would have no restricted provider network. It would really operate like the rest of New York Health. Federal government, under existing law, would send us a lot of money, and we would go forward. There are other options for merging it all together.
I would just add one thing, which is, this has come up over and over again in California as well, and the lawyers that work with us basically argued that Section 1332 under the Affordable Care Act does allow for these funds that are currently being paid by the federal government to the citizens of the state to be used for a new model, as long as you meet certain conditions, like the same coverage or better. It's not going to cost the federal government money. And this has been a debatable point where people say, oh, you have to get the waivers from the federal government. Well, the lawyers tell us that that's the law. That's the way it was written to the Affordable Care Act. Unless they change that law, that should stand.
Hi, thank you both for your presentations. My question, I heard the adjectives used, total coverage, full coverage, complete coverage. So what does that mean? I mean, there's a finite pool of funds.
Yep.
So could you explain what would be covered, what would be excluded?
Yep.
Thank you.
The bill specifies that any service that would now be covered for anyone under New York Medicaid, under Medicare, under the state public employee health benefit system, or the insurance mandates under New York law, and anything else the system chose to add would be included under the New York Health Act for all 20 million of us. And it's hard to imagine what might be left out. The New York bill as it now stands says long-term home care and nursing home care will not be added up front, but will be added down the road. We intend to amend the bill to say that long-term care will be added right up front. We're waiting till we can do another economic analysis of the bill that would include long-term care so that we can, when people say, well, yeah, how much is that going to cost, we can answer the question.
Paul, did you have a question? You asked. Did you answer a question, or let me just get a person?
Thanks a lot for coming out tonight and giving us this presentation. I want to follow up on this gentleman's question about maybe to word it in a different way. In New York State, maybe even in New York City, there are a lot of smart, large employers. How do they feel about this? Have they given any input on that? I guess that's what you were asking.
Yeah.
And my second question is, per capita, I know it's difficult to compare, but we have a lot of data on Medicare. So per capita, how much does it cost to deliver decent healthcare services per capita compared to what the private insurance is doing now? It's a basis for us to compare in this country. Do you understand my question?
Yeah, well, I'll give the second question to Peter, no, because that's what he does for a living.
What living?
Yeah, right.
You call this living?
Yeah. There is a group nationally, and they're active in New York as well, called the Sustainable Business Council, which is business people who work on a variety of the progressive side of issues. They are forming a growing group in New York of business people supporting the New York Health Act. So far, they have mostly brought in small businesses, but there is a wonderful documentary called Fix It, which some of you may have seen. If not, if you go to the New York Health Campaign website, nyccampaign.org, there is a link where you can watch it, which makes and the guy who did the movie is a medium-sized company manufacturer. I think it makes a terrific business case for the issue. But again, overcoming fundamental beliefs takes a lot of doing. But there are people in the business world who are working on doing that.
I'm not sure I can answer your question exactly. I can just tell you this, though, from memory, that if you look at the rate of increase in expenditures of Medicare versus commercial insurance, Medicare rates are much lower, Medicaid rates are much lower. The rate of increase in expenditures is much higher on the commercial side. If you want the exact numbers on anything that I've said, you could go to our website. I'm at the Political Economy Research Institute, PERI.org, and you can find our report there, and we have detailed data on all of this.
Under New York law, we allow insurance companies to charge about 15% of premium for things other than healthcare benefits, for administrative cost, profit, etc. There's no insurance company in New York that takes in less than the law entitles them to do. The Medicare program, the traditional Medicare program, not the side of it that uses insurance companies, spends about 2% on administrative costs.
Some of us have long-existing long-term care policies. How would these blend in with the new program?
I'm sorry, could you just say?
For those of us who have long-term care policies that have been in existence,
Right.
how would those blend?
Okay. Short answer is you and me both would no longer have to pay premiums for long-term care insurance. And while I might say to myself, gee, it's too bad that for 10 years I've been paying those premiums and now my bill is going to pay for my long-term care if I ever need it, I'll swallow that and be happy not to be paying the long-term care premiums anymore. I've got to run because I've got to, and I'm thankful that it seems to have stopped raining, I've got to catch the 7:30 train back to Manhattan for another event. But it's been terrific being here with you. I emailed to Peter Beichman a piece that we've done that explains the bill in more detail and has a lot of questions and answers. I hope Indivisible can make that available to everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Peter, are you available? Any other questions for Peter?
What happens to workers' comp and no fault? They have a real...
The parallel universe.
Yeah.
Well, I could just say in California, we were going to roll workers' comp in.
Fine.
Yeah, we were going to roll it into the bill.
Good idea.
Can you comment as you leave?
Yeah, we're looking at doing the same thing. The only reason and that's another piece that we say we'll do a year or two down the road, mainly because we haven't resolved the question of whether we want to keep workers' comp insurance for its experience-rated element, which helps encourage employers to have a safe workplace. whether we want to continue the workers' comp insurance helping to pay for those costs. But certainly the basic proposition, nobody likes workers' comp. Employers hate it, injured workers hate it. It should be rolled into the single-payer system.
All right, give me your best shot, go ahead.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, I'm curious. I'm a pediatrician, medical educator, so I'm already at the low end of the totem pole and not worried about my income getting cut. But how about the specialists? What about the ologists? And what's going to happen with the doctors' organizations with this?
I can only tell you how we approach this in California. And when we ran this by members of the California Medical Association, we got quite a lot of positive feedback, honestly. And the only specialty group that seemed to get their knickers in a twist was the anesthesiologists. And we worked out the numbers. Again, it's in our report. We basically, for simplicity and also for fiscal solvency, we said Medicare for all. And so we based all physician rates on Medicare rates. And what we did was, we know that Medicare pays something like 20 to 40% more than Medicaid, but it also pays about 28% less than commercial insurance. There would be an evening out, and yes, some physicians would lose in that game, but overall, they would be fine. And that doesn't even include the vast administrative efficiencies that physicians would have. Like, they wouldn't have those large staffs doing the billing and so on. So there's savings from that as well. But we stuck with the Medicare rates as a simple way to go. Uh-oh, here comes in the doctor. Go ahead, Maria.
He needs a mic. Anybody else have a question who hasn't asked a question already? 1 second.
Yeah, I'll have to wait.
I was wondering if undocumented are included in...
Yes, they are. The way it was written in California was any resident of the state of California, regardless of immigration status. And I think that's true in New York, but I'm not 100%.
Yeah, it is here. Otherwise...
I want to ask you the first question on the individual's handout, and I hope you've got New York State information as advanced as your California information. What's the best way to get this bill past the Health Committee and signed by Governor Cuomo? What's the role of groups like Indivisible? I'm so struck since I joined Indivisible how educated people, and I'm one of them, know nothing about state politics. Most of us never heard of this bill.
Why did you wait for Dick to leave the room?
I was the guy out there getting rained out, putting 25 cents in the parking meter.
I got that question. I wrote DG.
I mean, because the politics of this are so confusing. I've been to both of our meetings, and all these wonderful people are on the right side, but the politics are a mess.
I think the simple answer, the real answer is political mobilization. It's the only way that we have to change the public support for this approach, period. And we need massive support on the public side. That's the only way we're going to change this.
So I think people have to be ahead of the politicians as in gay marriage.
Of course they do.
Be ahead. We're not catching up.
Well, we need to meet with them on their own from Albany now.
Right, and I think from what we've learned, it's, putting pressure on the IDC, getting people out who have resisted this bill and others from moving forward. So I think with Andrew's help with the IDC, that's one thing we're focused on.
I mean, I think that's why getting the IDC out of the way is so important, because if you look at the 63 Senate districts, there are 32 elected Democratic senators right now, which is a razor-thin majority, and we're not going to go through the nonsense there, but there are 40 senatorial districts that went for Hillary Clinton. So that means that there are 8 Republicans who were elected in districts that voted for Hillary Clinton. And that's where the pressure may really...
But let me just say, there's more to it. Both, and this is an interesting parallel between New York and California. Our governor, Governor Cuomo, sat silent on this whole issue. And guess what?
Right,
Mr. Jerry Brown did the same. And yes, he did. Yes, he did. Even though we had very good connections with Brown, and he We believe that the bill was killed in California primarily by the insurers, but that Jerry Brown probably had a backroom deal with the assembly leader to kill the bill, because he wanted to keep his hands clean and away from the dirty work. And so the assembly leader took the hit and wouldn't let it out of his committee. Cuomo was not that different. In fact, Brown was more sympathetic than Cuomo. So even if you got the IDC thing, you know, these phony Democrats, you'd still have a governor who you need to change. And the only way to change these people, I think, again, is massive public support.
Massive public support. Any other questions? All right, Lori, you're going to finish us up.
So first and last, we have 20 million people in New York. I don't know how many in California. 40 million people in New York?
40 million in California.
40 million in California. We're talking about 2 states and not a federal program. What's to prevent the population from tripling overnight with chronically ill, underinsured?
Oh, you know, we answered this question to the California Department of Finance asked us the same question. I think it's kind of ridiculous for the following reasons. Yeah, there might be some migration, but the fact of the matter is, if you're going to move to a state, you need a job, because you're not going to, it's going to be difficult to move without one. And if you do have a job, you'll be contributing to the system. So I don't think that the migration issue is as big an issue as people have made it out to be. I would say one other thing about this national state thing. Yes, we're better off with a national program. No one would argue with that. But let's remember that in Canada, which has national single-payer health care, started in one province. It started in one province and spread to the rest of the country.
What was the guy's name? Douglas? Somebody Douglas?
Tommy Douglas.
Tommy Douglas.
And there couldn't be 2 better states to do this than New York and California.
One more question.
It's not a question, it's a comment.
Okay.
We haven't seen major mass migration to Canada despite this.
All right, thank you very much.